like a question we get all the time is just, is RO water, important in the solventless process? Is it a mission critical thing? What happens if you don't use RO water? So yeah, Ryan, I'm just curious to hear some of your thoughts on that, because I've heard this question answered a million ways, but yeah.
So is RO water necessary? Is 100% yes. Anything that is in your water at all at the end of the process is going to be in your hash.
Okay.
So if you have calcium, if you have nasty well water, if you're using just this stuff and you don't clean all that stuff up, it's going to be inside your hash after the freeze dry process. I've actually done a freeze dryer test where we just fill up the trays with water, and at the end was this nasty powdery residue.
Yeah.
And you don't want to be smoking that.
Yeah.
So RO water is extremely important, and so is RO ice. If you're using ice in your wash, it needs to be RO as well. You just don't want any type of contaminant or really anything in the water is going to add a nasty flavor at the end of your hash. So if you have clean water and clean starting material, you're good to go.
Yeah. And honestly, like, that's one of my favorite parts about solventless is, like, you can't hide anything. There's no like super secret trick or anything to make when you're not using the right ingredients and just the right kind of starting points, like, you're out of luck. That batch is gone. And
yeah, there's no remediation, there's no CRC with rosin. Your starting material is what you're going to get at the end. So
yeah, it's whether you're a home grower, like, a massive commercial facility, like, making clean solventless, it's a reflection on, like, your ability to actually, like, run a clean business.
Exactly.
Or just have a clean grow at your house and doing things right. Yeah. What are some things that you can tell me about, like, water temperature? Because I know there's a relationship with water temperature and water density, and I just don't quite understand the whole thing quite yet, but I'm just curious some of your thoughts on what we're looking at there, basically.
Yeah, so generally speaking, when people think about ice water hash, they are just trying to get the water as cold as possible so that the trike heads fall off and become brittle. What we're finding out now is necessarily that isn't the correct way to go about things. Okay. So there is a certain point in water temperature right above freezing, right above 32 degrees Fahrenheit, where the water is actually the least dense that it can possibly be. It's actually right at freezing temperature. So if you can get the water to that point, essentially you're going to make the trichomes that much more brittle, but they're going to be now more dense than the water, so they're going to be able to settle at the bottom of the vessel even quicker.
Okay.
At about 40 degrees or so, the density of that water is at its highest. And that, again, is kind of reflecting on that freezing temperature. Anything above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, the heads are starting to stick together. You're kind of getting that greasing effect and stuff like that. As you go up into the 50 and 60 degree range, so it almost becomes impossible to wash.
So does this mean that like at that 39 degree Fahrenheit number, are trichomes gonna fall out of flour the slowest at that temperature?
Exactly.
Is that kind of, okay.
So the water is actually the most dense at 40 degrees. I know that doesn't seem like much over that freezing temperature, but it's almost like this little bell curve. Okay. So any warmer than that, the water does become less dense, but your temperature is now too high to be washing.
Yeah.
So it's like this magical point essentially where the trikes are super brittle, they're falling off into the water, and they're also able to sink the quickest.
Yeah.
And even these little heads, like you get your like 45 micron heads essentially, that might be, just floating around like you're just shaking up a ice.
Yeah, like a little mason jar.
Yeah, exactly. So if those 45 heads are, just floating around and your water is super dense, you might not get the yield that you're expecting, essentially.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And this is a little bit of a off-topic question, but if I'm just washing at my house, where should I be taking my water temperature readings? Should it be down at the bottom of my container? Should I be going for like a temperature like in the middle of the mass of my flour? Or like, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on like, is there an actual like right spot to be measuring temperature to give me the best information here?
Exactly. So I think of it just like I'm cooking a steak.
Okay.
I want it right in the center of the material. So surface of the water is going to always be a little bit warmer. The very bottom where the agitation's happening is generally a little bit colder.
Okay.
So I like to have my temperature probe right in the middle of the material, just giving me the most accurate reading, essentially.
Okay.
So
that's actually super interesting. Another thing, that I was always kind of curious about is, what do you think the role of your pH level in water plays in like the washing process? Is it something that's super important? Like, should we be measuring this kind of every wash? And have you ever heard of people going with a really alkaline solution, like a really high pH? Like I've heard of guys using, like, they call it Kangen water out there. But I'm just curious to hear some of your thoughts on the pH of water and just what's going on there, basically.
So generally, the pH of the water isn't going to be affected too much until you really start breaking apart the chlorophyll in your wash.
Okay.
Most of our RO water, it's still going to be around 7
okay.
pH, which is kind of right around average for water. But as you break apart the chlorophyll and the anthocyanins and like the purple cannabis, you're going to notice that the pH actually starts to drop and becomes more acidic.
Okay.
So if you're doing multiple washes, you really want to become aware of this acidity in the water because it can actually break down certain cannabinoids.
And this is something I can just look at with my eyes.
Yes.
Like, you know, color of the water is going to tell me a lot about where my pH is, right?
Yep, and that's another thing too. It may look extremely pretty, and you may be tempted to kind of run that
even
water over.
Good.
It smells good. It's got a slight, that small residual amount of terpenes still in that water.
Yeah.
So sometimes people want to flow it, refill it over and over and over again. But there is a certain point where the pH of that water will start to break down cannabinoids in your wash. So if you're being super gentle when it comes to like introducing chlorophyll into the wash and stuff, you really shouldn't notice that much of a difference from the very beginning to the end. But again, certain strains, how you wash, by the end, if you're noticing that you're dropping pH pretty significantly, what you might want to do is start chilling your RO water and re-adding fresh water after every wash.
Okay.